Messi. Surging forward with real menace here. Brilliant from Messi. Oh, what a goal that is!
Hi, this is Johnathan McKinstry, the head coach of the Uganda men's national team, and you're listening to the Bola Bola Show.
Hello everyone and welcome again to the Bola Bola Show. It's me Alwin and it's been truly a pleasure and joy to be part of this show with my two buddies Bala and Sivan. And on behalf of our Bola Bola team, I would like to thank each and every one of our listeners out there for their subscriptions and also the support and encouragement that you guys have given to us on email. So please do keep those emails coming at info@bolabola.my. And as for today, we have another interesting episode, guys. But before that, let me bring in my two buddies. Firstly, Bala, how's it going?
Hi, Alvin. How are you doing? I'm doing well. Things are getting better. It's good to be back again after in the Bola Bola show. It's been 2 to 4 weeks. We took a kind of break. I'm glad and looking forward for this show because it's a very special show. Isn't it, Sivan?
Yep, it is another special show. And of course, good to be back again on the Bola Bola Show podcast. So without further ado, Bala, why don't we bring our guest in?
All right. Okay. So today is going to be a special show because we're having a special person. He's currently the national head coach of Uganda. And his name is Mr. Johnathan McKinstry. Mr. Johnathan, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, guys. It's great to join you. Thank you for having me on, and looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay.
Just for our fans and also to our listeners, perhaps you can introduce yourself with your what's the current role and what are you doing currently?
Yeah, so as you've just said, I'm Johnathan McKinstry, and I'm the current head coach of the Uganda men's national team, also responsible for our under-23 Olympic team. And I've been in this role now since September of last year, so we're sort of approaching 1 year in the position. And this is my third international position in Africa. Prior to that was with the Sierra Leone and the Rwandan national teams, as well as some club positions in both Europe and Asia. So, it's another step along the journey, but here in Uganda for the last year and, hopefully for many more years to come.
Mm-hmm. Of course, your career as a football coach is well documented, but perhaps you might want to share a little bit about your playing chapter.
Yeah, of all the questions, this probably has one of the shorter answers because it was really quite a short playing career. I think I was growing up in Northern Ireland. We don't have a professional league in Northern Ireland. We have a semi-professional league. So even if you make it to the top of the game domestically back at home, you still sort of need to support yourself in another way. For those players who want to go professional from Northern Ireland, they really at the age of 16, 17 have to be good enough to make the jump over to England or Scotland to join either a Premier League or Championship team, usually, who would have the finance. And really for me at the age of 16, 17, I knew that I wasn't quite at that level, that, my route would have to be more of a semi-professional one if I wanted it, and that maybe the pro game as a player was, 1 or 2 steps beyond me. But, for me, it was very much, I felt, it was one of those things that I felt I could understand the game and I could conceptualize it in a way in my head that maybe I just wasn't technically quite at the level to execute. But I always felt I had an understanding for the game, maybe in advance of some of my teammates. And so when that realization dawned on me that I wasn't going to be a pro player, then I thought, well, how can I remain involved in this game? How can I make this a career? And you've got to remember back then, you're sort of talking, this is, the mid 2000s maybe, and you're talking that you didn't have Jose Mourinho yet. There wasn't really, Jose was obviously one of the first of the modern era of what you would term career coaches who hadn't been a top player. And since Jose has come on the scene, there obviously has been numerous ones, Villas-Boas, Brendan Rodgers, there's been many, Graham Potter to a degree now with Brighton. But back then there wasn't examples. So for me, it was sort of, searching in the dark a little bit to see, what was possible. And really it's just been sort of step by step since then. That was 17, 18 years ago now. And yeah, it's really just been a step by step process ever since in the world of professional coaching.
Interesting. Okay, rather than you giving up playing and maybe going back as a common people, like example, like an engineer or a doctor or anything like that, but what actually made you prompted basically to continue career in the football and you went to coaching in such an early age? What is your motivating factor or perhaps what made you to do that actually?
Well, I think the initial steps were simply, this was a game that I couldn't get enough of. If you ask I don't come from a football family. My brothers played rugby, my father's involved in motorsport, and, my immediate family was not football. But the game really it grabbed me from a young age, from sort of 6, 7, 8 years of age. And it was just everything to me. And so the ability to stay involved and be involved in it was obviously a huge motivating factor. I think another side of it is, for me, I'm very much a people person. I like working with other people. I like, trying to solve problems and trying to help people improve. I always say, my business, what I do day to day, is helping other people maximize their talent, their potential. I just happen to be a football coach, but I think if I hadn't have got involved in football, I would have been involved in some industry that was working directly with people and trying to help them realize their ambitions. So, football just happened to be the thing for me. And so that was probably the initial steps. I think a secondary step that was probably very important in the grand scheme was a meeting with a careers advisor when I was maybe 16, 17 years of age, who basically told me that the ambition to be a pro football coach, if I hadn't been a pro football player, was unrealistic and that it wasn't possible to do. And maybe it's just my upbringing or the environment I came up in, but when you're told that you can't do something, you get double motivation to go and do it and to prove people that it is possible. And so, whilst that meeting was about somebody, telling me what wasn't possible, actually what it did for me was almost set a challenge. And that sort of set me out on the road of saying, well, no, I think it is possible, and I'm going to prove you and anyone else who doubts me wrong.
How about your family support in this matter, or your maybe family and friends? Were they encouraging you?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think, again, going back to a period where there was no examples to point to of, people who'd reached the top of the game, being, without a pro playing background, naturally there was caution. I think there was probably 1 or 2 moments where my family were like, okay, pursue that, but maybe have a second option as well. But for me, I'm very much all or nothing. If I have something that even now, if I have a project that I'm working on, it gets 100% of me. And, I put all of my energy and intensity into it to try and make sure we can make a success of it. So and look, I can understand that sort of balance of things, have a few options. But definitely, I think when my parents saw that I was, this was what motivated me, and it was, even as a young coach, as a 16, 17-year-old, I was, getting out of bed at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning to go and coach, 8-year-olds at the local rugby club where we had a little mini soccer thing. And I'm not sure how many 17-year-olds are doing that. So I think they saw that it was something that, was hugely motivating for me. And I think when any parent sees that, they're fully supportive of it. And I think because of that support, I've been able to take risks, because, if you know that you've got a supportive network around you and behind you and almost a safety net, then you're willing to take extra risks, because if you do stumble, then you've got those people around to sort of help pick you up and help get you going again.
All right, fantastic. So, Jonathan, when it comes to African teams, despite their enormous talent and potential, and especially with their physique and their skills that they have, they do very well at the younger age categories, like the Olympics, the under 17, or even the under 20s, where Nigeria, Cameroon, and Ghana have been successful. But why do you think when it comes to the senior game, there is a struggle to replicate this similar success?
I think there's a few reasons. I think firstly, in the African context, I think a lot of the associations place huge value on tangible success at those youth tournaments. Success in those youth tournaments is, winning the under 17 World Cup or winning the under 20 World Cup. Whereas if you look at maybe the top footballing nations in the world, the likes of Brazil, Argentina, Spain, whoever it happens to be from around the world, success at youth level is, yes, they like to win the tournaments, but it's not the barometer upon which they'll judge success. Their success is how many players do they promote into the senior team. So, for example, if you look at the England youth national teams that have done very well in recent years, and you look at the players that are in those teams, the likes of Phil Foden, the likes of Jadon Sancho, there's numerous players, but they're not necessarily, the biggest, they're not necessarily the strongest, but they've been put into those teams because they realize their long-term potential is to be one of the top players in the world potentially. Whereas I sometimes think, even at domestic level in the African context, you see players who maybe are slightly less talented, but physically they're more developed. They are, so the reason they're successful at U17 level is because physically they're more developed than everybody else on the field. And yes, that will bring you success, in the short term, because you might be able to use those physical advantages to maybe maneuver or bully, to use a different word, other teams at those tournaments. But in the long term, it isn't physique that wins you a men's World Cup or a women's World Cup. It's technical, ability and tactical awareness. And, I think you only need to look at, for example, let's take Egypt for an example in Africa of someone who maybe doesn't do it the way a lot of other African countries. At youth level, I think at U17 and U20 level, Egypt have, I think, only got to the semi-finals of the African Cup of Nations like 2 or 3 times in their whole history. Yet at senior level, Egypt have won the African Cup of Nations, I think it's 7 times.
Yeah.
So why do they not have any success at the junior levels, yet they are the most successful nation in Africa at the senior level? And it's because their approach to youth development is geared towards producing players for the senior team and not about winning the junior tournaments.
So what you're trying to say here is, for those junior tournaments, just by being strong and physical can actually get you far.
I think it can. I think, look, ultimately, having a blend of these things, if you have a team of all very small and slight players, you might struggle as well. But it's about having a balance. But definitely, if you look at those junior national teams, a lot of the African teams that have done very well, it's, there's a physical component combined with speed that really, helps them excel. And then when you get to the senior level, all of that sort of equaled itself out. The South American teams, the European teams, the African teams. Asia's maybe a little bit different because sort of the body type of a lot of Asian national teams, especially in East Asia, is a little bit smaller. But by and large, at the top level of the game, everybody's, matured by that stage. They're big and strong. And so that advantage disappears when you get to the senior game because everyone's caught up with you. And so if you've put so much reliance on those factors at the expense of maybe tactical development, then it eventually becomes an issue for you.
Okay.
Okay, I think a very interesting insight you gave us. But at the age of 28, you were the youngest international head coach when you took over Sierra Leone national team job. Uh, would you like just go through with us on the experience and how actually you got the job and what actually made you to put that offer?
Yeah, it was a fantastic experience, first and foremost. I think everybody, when they take their first steps in the professional game, there's so many challenges. Doesn't matter whether it's with an African national team or a club team in any part of the world. I think that first position is one that, you're learning on the job. They always say in football, you're learning on the job. There's no qualification you can do that trains you to be a first team manager or head coach. You can get certain skills through various badges, but the job itself is very unique. And until you've done it, it's hard to really quantify what it's all about. The Sierra Leone job, look, and I'm open enough to say it was very much a case of right time, right place. I was 27 years old. I was running the only sort of professional football academy in Sierra Leone. It was a privately run academy. I'd been in the country for 3 years. It was a fully residential, boarding school, football academy. And we had the top young players between the ages of 12 and 18 at our facility. And so I knew the country very well. I knew the culture very well. I could speak the language. And with 3 games of the World Cup qualifiers still remaining, the previous coach of Sierra Leone sort of stepped away. A Swedish coach decided, that was time for him. There was only 3 games remaining. The chances of qualifying were slim, but still did exist. And yeah, because there was only 3 games remaining, it became apparent within Sierra Leone and just within football circles that the federation were probably going to make a short-term appointment, and that rather than bringing in a overseas foreign coach, they would go for a domestic coach. Now, the moment they said they were going to go for a domestic coach, I thought to myself, well, look, I was a UEFA A licensed coach. I was working with the best young players in the country. I knew the league and the national team very well after 3 years of watching them. And I just sort of said, right, let's make some phone calls. Let's get in the room with the decision makers. So we organized a meeting jointly with the Football Federation and the Ministry of Sport. And I went in and I presented 2 things to them. One was a dossier on how we could improve Sierra Leonean football over the next sort of 3 to 5 years. And another one was about our upcoming game against Tunisia that Sierra Leone needed to win to remain in the race for the World Cup. And it was basically, a blow-by-blow account of how we could win that game. And yeah, we went in and I presented, and 3 days later, they called and offered me the job. Initially on a 3-game basis that I would cover the remaining World Cup games, and then that we would review it to see if I'd done enough to stay on for the next African Cup of Nations sort of qualifying series. And yeah, so I think I was confident that I would go in and I would probably, I felt I was the most qualified coach based in Sierra Leone at the time. So I was confident going into the room. I knew what I would do with the team. And but I'm also not naive enough to think that if I'd made that application whilst living in London or living in New York or somewhere else, that I would have got the job. No, it would have cost the federation too much. They would have had to pay for visas, flights, hotel, everything on top of the salary. But the fact that I walked into the room and the only thing they had to consider was the salary itself in terms of what I needed to do the job, I think it made it easier for them to say yes. And so definitely a case of right time, right place. But, we went in, we got the job, and I think over the next 18, 19 months, we did a good job. We made solid progress with the team. It was progress I felt was cut short a bit, but definitely, it was a hugely enjoyable experience. The quality of the players we had was top level. We had guys playing for AC Milan, for Norwich, for Celtic. We had guys in Sweden and in America. It was a really top level squad. So in terms of a first opportunity in the game, I consider myself very fortunate to have been given that opportunity at such a young age.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and what was it like, at such a young age? You're standing in the dugout area, facing far more experienced coaches.
It was exciting. Look, for me, and even now, I think any coach will tell you that as they're coming up through the game, yes, you are professional yourself and you have your own achievements and objectives. But when you come up against, the historically top coaches, so if you're a coach, coaching in, the Championship or League One in England, and you come up in the FA Cup against a Pep Guardiola or Jurgen Klopp, those are great moments, not for any sort of starstruckness or fandom, but it's a great moment to test yourself against these coaches. How does your team and your approach to the game stack up against somebody who's been there and done that? You look at Sierra Leone. In one of my final games, we traveled to the Ivory Coast, to Abidjan, to play not just against the Ivory Coast, but also their coach, Hervé Renard, who only 2 years earlier had won the African Cup of Nations with Zambia. So not only are you playing against a top team with top players, but also a top coach. And when you go into those games, it's a nice test to see, right, where do I fit in this sort of hierarchy of football, and how do you and can we cause people who've been there and done that problem? So for me, but that that's the same, as I said, if you talk to any coach, and when he's coming up against some of the top teams and managers in the world, it's a great challenge to gauge your own progress.
And mentioning about big name coaches, so was Hervé Renard the biggest coach you have faced, or was there any other bigger names that you have faced during your time here? Yeah.
Oh no, I've been quite fortunate to go up against a lot of people. I think Avram Grant was the head coach of Ghana. Aliou Cisse and his Senegalese team. There's plenty along the way. But we're all colleagues, and the thing about it is, everybody, is very. I think once the full-time whistle goes, between the 90 minutes, you're doing your job and you're doing everything to try and get your team to win. But before the whistle, after the whistle, everyone, we're all in the same industry. We're all trying to do the same thing, and we're all very supportive of each other. So, and those are great, even though sometimes those conversations can be quite short conversations, just because teams have to get away to the airport and what have you. They're also very valuable in terms of sometimes you exchange a bit of information or, some words, and it's very useful in your career development.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And of course, being such a young coach, you are probably having players who are older than you. I mean, how do the players respond to these kind of things? And I mean, is it all done on a professional level?
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, as the years have went by, that has changed because players naturally are always of a certain age profile, whereas, unfortunately, we can't stop the hands of time. I'm forever getting slightly older. And but with Sierra Leone, I would say the majority of the team were either my age or older than me. It was quite when I took over Sierra Leone, it was quite an aging team, probably an average age of 29, 30, and I was only 27 at the time. But I think you have opportunities very early in your tenure to put markers down. So your first team meeting, your first training session, you've got to make sure there's real quality there and that you have the answers when they put questions to you, because top professionals will put questions to you. They'll want to know why we're doing this, why are we doing A instead of B? And so you've got to have your answers for those. And I think all along the way, planning and preparation is one of the cornerstones of, what any coaching team of mine always put at the forefront of our daily work. And so we make sure that we're not caught short in any of those moments. And then you've got the other moments where, maybe somebody does challenge you, whether it's through what they say or it might just be through their actions. If they're late for a meeting, how do you react in those moments? Are you enforcing the standards that you've laid out to the team, or are you letting people away with it? And, for me, I've always, I think I was raised to, believe in doing good work and being respectful and having high standards. But then I've also been raised to hold other people accountable to those standards as well. If we've all agreed what the rule is, then when someone steps outside of those boundaries, it's not just important for me or that individual player, it's important for the entire group that you enforce those boundaries. And yeah, there's been a few moments over the years where that's happened, but I'm never, I'm not shy in enforcing, what is correct and what is right. So I think all the players take note of that, and they understand that, yeah, this is serious, and, the coach is somebody who knows what he wants and is going to do what it takes to be successful.
Okay. Of course, in your career, you also had coach in Asia with Bangladeshi side, Saif Casey. What was your experience like with them? Because I heard there were many great times. You had great times with that club.
Yeah, it was enjoyable. It was a job offer that came out of the blue. I think I heard about it. Someone put the potential to me. I was in London at the time, and it was put to me maybe on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and by Saturday I was on an airplane to Dhaka. So it was quite a quick turnaround. But as a club, very supportive of what we wanted to do. Reasonably well financed by a big energy company in Bangladesh, and so the managing director who was responsible for the club, he was of the mindset that he wanted to give us everything within reason that we wanted, but then he would expect results. What they didn't want was to say, no, you can't have that, and then for us to turn around afterwards and say, oh, but we could have achieved more if you'd given us what we'd asked for. So in general, as long as it was within reason and as long as it was within budget, the club were very good at saying yes to things we wanted to do, whether that was GPS, whether that was, analysis technology, tracking technology, whether that was flying to an away game rather than taking an 8-hour bus journey. I think they were very supportive of what we wanted to do, and a very forward-thinking club. And because of that, we were able to, make really positive strides, on and off the field. And, I enjoyed my time in Bangladesh, and actually was all, very much set up to stay. We started pre-season to go into the new football season back in August, September time. But the offer from Uganda came in, and really, for me, people sort of sometimes ask about, do you prefer international to club football? But for me, it's not one or the other. It's about the opportunity. And for me, the Ugandan position was one that was impossible to turn down, really. But again, very professional with the club. The club understood that as well, and they wished me all the best, and we're still in contact. They still ask for player recommendations from me. So it's we left on very good terms, which was nice.
Okay, so Johnathan, you mentioned something interesting about GPS just now. So maybe for the layman out there, like how does this GPS technology been implemented? Is it installed in a certain part of the player's attire or something like that for tracking?
Yeah, so the most common use of GPS, for people who don't know, stands for Global Positioning System. So it's no different really to like when you have your satellite navigation system in your car. It can tell you where you are. Yep. And so the GPS system is a small device, maybe, I don't know, about a quarter the size of your iPhone, that sort of usually gets worn in a vest. You wear like a vest that looks a little bit like a female sports bra.
I see.
And it gets it gets worn underneath your match shirt or your training shirt usually, and the GPS pod, and there's usually a heart rate monitor. that's attached to it as well. And basically what it does is it tracks all the movement of the players, it tracks their heart rate, it tracks, there's like about 100 or more metrics that it tracks. It'll be, how many times you sprint, how many times you run at, peak velocity, and there's lots and lots of things it pulls. And what it allows us to do is not only track movements, but actually the heart rate is a really important one, because fitness is a very personal metric. My 90% of my heart rate might be higher or lower than 90% of your heart rate. And so even if we are doing the same work and training, I might be getting less benefit out of it than you are, because actually for me to get the same benefit, I need to do more work. Because the way your body works is very personal to you. And so linking all of this data together with the heart rate of the players is really valuable. Especially the stuff we get from matches is interesting, but I think the real value in the systems is the day-to-day training, because we're able to track it live from the side of the pitch. We usually have a guy, one of our staff will be sat with a laptop on the side of the training pitch, and he'll be able to say to me, "Oh, coach, this player, his heart rate isn't high enough. He needs to work harder." And so I can shout onto that player and say, "Look, we need a little bit more from you." Or I might see that another player has done a remarkably large amount of work in that given day. And so maybe towards the end of training, I tell him to stop and go and stretch out 10 or 15 minutes earlier than everybody else. So it's about tailoring training to the individual so that they get exactly what they personally need to be in the best condition when it comes to match day.
Okay, very interesting. So, Johnathan, now let's talk about your current job with the Uganda national team. So you were running alongside 137 other applicants. So maybe you want to tell us more about this, and how did you manage to secure this job?
I think it's twofold. You've got to remember, a few years ago, I was the head coach of Rwanda, which is right next door. So us and Uganda and Rwanda would be historical rivals. And so it's a bit like England v Scotland, or I don't know, India v Pakistan, or, any of these really sort of just historical relationships that go beyond the football pitch. And so I was working in Rwanda for a couple of years, and we did quite well. We set some new milestones for the Rwandan national team. And we also came up against Uganda a couple of times. And whilst on both of those occasions, Uganda came out on top, they were very close run things, and we really did push them to their limit, both here and in Kigali. And so I think maybe that stayed with them, because it wasn't just somebody applying, it was someone who they'd come up against my team before. So they knew what a Johnathan McKinstry team played like, what it looked like. And so I think part of it was, well, Uganda historically would have more talent than Rwanda. It's, Uganda's a much bigger country, probably has a better history in the game. And so part of it was probably, well, if he's able to do this type of job with Rwanda, we will be able to give him more talent to work with, so he can do even more here in Uganda. So I think that's part of it. I think another part of it is that the way I see the game and the way I want my teams to play lines up very well with the bigger picture that the Ugandan Federation, FUFA, has for the game here. I look at when I came in, and I do some work with the youth development department, and they put together, they have their youth development documents, and a lot of the key principles that they're looking to instill their young players, I'd say 90% of them line up really well with what I look for my teams to do at senior level. And so there's a real synergy there. And so I think the chief executive and the executive committee here looked at what I was presenting to them and could see the alignment between that and their long-term vision for football in Uganda. And yeah, so it was those two things. I think one was just my positive work in the area, in the region historically, and then also the alignment of my vision of football to Uganda's vision of football.
Of course, I mean, and of course, speaking of rivalry, as you just mentioned, I mean, was it any difficult or challenge to take over the job, like in a sense of what happened in Ukraine recently with Misha Lukescu? When he took over Dynamo Kiev, there was a protest from Dynamo fans because of his allegiance in the past with Shakhtar Donetsk. I mean, was there that sort of rivalry exist in African football?
No, not really. It does exist, don't get me wrong, but in my case, I think it also helps that Uganda have previously had a coach who was formerly the Rwanda coach. So Micho, who qualified Uganda to their first African Cup of Nations in 40 years back in 2017, who's actually a good friend of mine as well. He had previously coached the Rwandan team. And so I think they looked at it that, here's a coach who'd previously been with the Rwandan team who came to Uganda and was very successful. And actually, if you look comparing my own record to his in Rwanda, we probably had a better period whilst I was with the Rwandan team. So, I think part of it, they'd already had that movement of a coach across the border. So, yeah, it was never really an issue.
Mm-hmm. And what was your immediate goal when you took over the Uganda national team? I mean, do you have any sorts of targets, say qualification for the African Cup of Nations, or maybe in the long term of the World Cup?
Yeah, well, again, it's very refreshing here. FIFA, the Football Federation, are very well organized. We've got 70 full-time members of staff at the Football Association. We're one of the largest associations in Africa. And, our leadership is very, progressive. And so when I came in, it was, look, we want to improve. It was like, last time out, we got to the last 16 of the African Cup of Nations. In 2017, they qualified and got knocked out in the group stages. In 2019, they qualified and progressed from the group stages to the last 16. And so it was, look, we would like to improve. But also there was a little bit, we need to transition the team because there was a number of players who maybe played at both of those Cup of Nations who now are getting a little bit older. And so we need to usher in, some of the emerging talent needs to be incorporated into the senior national team. So can we successfully do that whilst maintaining or progressing our performance at continental level? And then beyond that, again, last time out in qualifying for the 2018 World Cup in Russia, Uganda finished second in their qualifying group behind Egypt, but ahead of Ghana and Congo. So, and even beating Egypt here in Kampala. So it was a very positive World Cup qualifying campaign. And again, the Federation here have set the medium-term target of qualifying for the 2026 World Cup in the USA, Mexico, and Canada. But for us, we looked at it and said, well, we finished second last time out. We fail. We'll have to see what the draw brings up. This is when I took the job, what the draw brings up. And then can we take a step forward and finish top of our qualifying group? Now, in Africa, after the qualifying groups, you still have the playoff round. So winning your qualifying group doesn't book your ticket to the World Cup, but it gets you to that final playoff round. So, and we've been drawn in a group with our neighbours, Kenya and Rwanda, and also Mali, who are a very exciting young team, but they are young. And so, for us, we see it as a group with lots of potential. So, we believe we can go back to the African Cup of Nations. We believe that with good performances, we could top our World Cup qualifying group over the next 18 months. And yeah, if we do those things, it will be solid progress, both on and off the field.
Okay. So, like most African nations, the Ugandan players ply their trade throughout the world. And looking at your current squad, you have players in the UK, playing in the UK, US, Sweden, and Saudi Arabia, to name a few. So how do you keep in touch with them? And do you speak to them constantly?
Yeah, I think one of the the big things in international football is communication. I think in any business, in any walk of life, communication is so important. But when you don't have your players on the training field every day, how you maintain communication and build rapport and relationships is really important. And there's no doubt about it that, look, if we were sitting 20 years ago, it would be so much more difficult than it is nowadays, because now you have so many mediums, whether it's, social media apps, whether it's things like this, like Zoom, like WhatsApp. We even have an online platform for the players, like a private platform where all the players can log on, and we upload like little tactical scenarios, and we have discussions, and I'll maybe do like live sort of tactical webcasts sometimes for them, just little short things, so that we're still touching in with them whilst they're at their club environment. So I think things are made a lot easier with modern technology, and naturally there's so many scouting platforms as well. So like things like Instat, Y Scout. Basically every Monday and Tuesday, my days are made up with watching all of these games from Saudi Arabia, from Kazakhstan, from Israel, USA. I get to see a lot of football because every league around the world is covered. You can get full 90-minute videos from every game in every country now, basically. And so that makes it easier to keep track of the players and just keep up to date with all of them and how they're doing.
Okay. Coming back to Asian football, with having experience managing Bangladeshi side, Saif KC, what is actually your view on Asian football? And maybe in the future, would you like to return back to this part of the world?
Yes is the answer. I would love to come back to Asia at some point to work. For me, it's, football's a crazy industry. You never, it's like a river. It sort of meanders off. It can bend left and right, and, it can change direction suddenly. And it's not a straight highway. A football career, especially in coaching, is not a highway. It's more of that meandering river. So you're never really sure exactly where the next step is going to take you. You just hope that it's in a positive direction and an upwards trajectory. For me, ever since I was very young, I've been sort of really enthralled by Asian football. Growing up in the UK, I remember there wasn't a lot of live games on the TV. In the early days of the Premier League and Sky Sports, yes, you had some games. And then, domestic TV had an Italian football highlight show. But then in the early days of Sky Sports, they also had the J-League review, which was a weekly review of Japanese football. And I remember as, a 10-year-old, whatever it was, 10, 11, 12, every weekend making sure I never watched the J-League review. And I think I told you earlier, growing up, I was, just crazy about the game. I loved it. And, there probably wasn't many 12-year-olds in Ireland, watching Japanese football, every weekend. So for me, but I just, the technical level, I was always really taken aback by the technique and, the team cohesion of Japanese football then. And then that obviously grew as I became aware and got to watch of Asian football more widely. After I left Sierra Leone, I actually spent a couple of months in Southeast Asia, just again watching matches, training sessions, meeting coaches in places like Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia. I actually came down to Malaysia for a week and went and sort of watched a couple of games and met some club officials. And so I actually flew over Zesh Rahman, who obviously was a very successful player in Malaysia for a number of years. I went and sort of met up with him. I was at Pahang he played for.
Yep, he played for Pahang.
So went over, I flew over to Pahang to meet with him and sort of see around over there. So yeah, for me, Asian football, I really do enjoy it. And I was really pleased to be able to go and work in Bangladesh. And look, it's a bit like Africa. People from the outside see Africa as one place that's all the same. And that's just not true. That's like saying England is the same as Romania. They're very different in the same way that, Sierra Leone is hugely different from Uganda. And it's the same in Asia. You look at the different component parts of the Asian continent, and there's such a huge range in culture and just, the environment, the weather. And so, definitely, if the opportunity presented itself in the future and the timing was right to go back to Asia, I think it would definitely be something I would enjoy doing.
Of course, we would love to have your expertise in this part of the world as well. Now, I mean, coaching in today's football, I mean, it presents a wide variety of challenges. I mean, it's not just anymore about talking about technicals and stuff on the field, but there's also issues related off the field as well, especially with regards to mental health. I mean, how do you manage footballers who you believe could have potential mental or emotional health issues?
I think you're absolutely right. These are areas that we need to be aware of, and there are areas we need to do better in. I think I said earlier that no training course. We do all our coaching licenses, whether it's with the AFC or UEFA or CAF, but these don't necessarily prepare you to be a head coach or a manager. There's things that you have to learn and improve on, and it's the same with areas like mental health, that it's hard to really, until there are trainings you can go and do, no doubt. But I think a big part of it, again, is communication. How do you communicate with people? When I first got here in Uganda, one of the first things I did was I called all of our players, all of the guys playing abroad. I had a 10 to 15 minute phone call with them over the first 2 days I was in office. And anyone who was playing in Uganda, I went and met personally. And one of the things was I wanted feedback for them on what they felt was good, what they felt could be better. And one of the things I got told by some coaches and some officials was, the players here are very good at listening and they'll try to implement what you're asking, but they're very poor at giving feedback. Now, when I hear that, my first question is, well, are they poor at giving feedback, or are we bad at asking for feedback? Because if you want people to be open and honest with you, you have to create an environment where they trust that it's going to be taken in a fair and genuine manner, so that if they tell you something in confidence, it will remain private. If they tell you something that you don't like, but you will take it, professionally as their opinion or their viewpoint. And so I think we need to, first of all, create a safe environment where players, and not just players, anyone associated with the organization, feels safe in airing their views and telling you what they need to tell you. And I think if we develop that culture within our organizations and with our teams, then we can start, tackling issues such as mental or emotional health issues. Because everyone says one of the most important things with these issues is that people need to talk. They need to have a conversation with someone if they're struggling. But if you don't feel as though you're in a safe environment and that people will listen to you, it's very difficult to have those conversations. So for me, building relationships, building rapport, being authentic, and being genuine with people and trying to help people. I feel, I've been here just under a year now, and I feel very privileged that a number of players, feel comfortable at, asking to go for a coffee or ringing me up and saying, look, coach, I've got this challenge in my life. It might be a professional one. It might be a personal one. We had a player who, unfortunately, one of their parents passed away not so long ago. And, he called me the day after that happened, and we had a conversation about it. And so, I feel very privileged that players, have, when they're in those difficult moments, that they feel like I'm somebody that they can talk to about that. And, and I'm more than happy to do that, because, everybody struggles. And if we can help people through those challenging moments, then I think we all do better because of it. And ultimately, if we can do better on that side of it, I think it has an impact how we perform on the field. I think it can help us be successful on the field as well.
With the experience we have, and I'm sure we travel around the world, especially in the part of Africa. What is the most memorable moment as a coach? And perhaps you can just give us, our viewers, why is this special for you?
Do you know, for me, like I've been very fortunate, I've had a lot of standout moments, when whether it's individual games or, players, just stepping up to the mark and showing they've got the level of performance in them that you always believed they had in them. So I think, there's been so many moments like that, or when your back's against the wall and you come up with a big performance. But I actually think, for me, look, I said very early on, my passion in life, yes, football is a huge passion of mine and is my life's sort of work. But the thing about it that drives me the most is seeing people make the most of their potential. They have this potential that you can see in them. And when they realize that potential and sort of step out of the shadows into that spotlight, that's what really gets me. That's like, I'm their biggest cheerleader when they do that. And we had a couple of young lads who, played for me in my academy in Sierra Leone. We scouted them when they were like 12 years old. And then a few years later, actually before I became head coach of the national team, I got asked to be like the U17, U20 to help with the junior national teams. And I actually turned it down because I felt it would be a conflict of interests, with me also running a football academy for those age categories. But what then went on was a couple of these boys, went on to be selected and to represent their country in a U20 World Cup qualifier. And, these are boys who at the time were only 17 years of age, 16, 17. They'd been with us since they were 12. They'd worked hard on the field, in the classroom. They were humble guys, kids. And this was them, representing their country. And so
seeing
for
your
me,
son
moments,
getting an award.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things that, you've sort of tried to guide them and tried to sort of point them in the right direction, but ultimately you can't walk that journey for them. They've got to do it themselves. No matter how much you want to, drive them forward, they've got to do it themselves. So when you see a young man like that, and now one of them's actually playing professionally out in the USA, and the other one's back in Egypt. And, but to see that moment where the two of them pulled on that Sierra Leone shirt and, just made a dream, a personal dream of theirs and their families come true, moments like that really stand out to me. And they're ones that, if ever sometimes the business of football isn't a nice business, there's the game's a beautiful game, but sometimes the business side of football is not nice. But it's moments like that that you remember and go, look, this is why we're involved in the game, for moments like that.
All right. So, Johnathan, and finally, whom do you draw your inspiration, from as a mentor in terms of coaching? Is there any particular coach that has meant a lot to you?
It's been interesting in my career. I've not had the fortune to work under a lot of coaches. I think, like, if you just look at my career, I became an academy manager at 24 years old. So I was in charge of the academy. I then became a head coach in the pro game at 27 years old. So, unlike, you look at someone like Mikel Arteta, who, got a great schooling of working under Pep Guardiola for 3 years. I've never really had that type of experience. However, I have, I'm always hungry for knowledge, and I read a lot and I listen a lot, and, I try to go to conferences and seminars as much as I can. And, actually I draw a lot of experience, or a lot of sort of guidance, if you would, from a lot of American coaches, actually. in whether it's in basketball or American football. At the moment, I'm actually reading Tom Caulfield's book, who's the former New York Giants American football coach. And but one of my sort of great ones has always been John Wooden. Sort of the now, last few years passed away, UCLA basketball coach. And here's a guy who, was very much, look, if you train basketball players, you're only going to get a certain level. But if you teach people, if you treat them as people and you support them as the whole person, and you have high standards and you try to educate these young men, then anything can happen. And so for me, guys like John Wooden, as I said, I'm reading Tom Caulfield's book now, but then also, growing up, I was a huge fan of Brian Clough. I was a huge fan of Brian Clough. Now, I think Brian Clough and I are quite different. I know some people. I've done some coaching qualifications with people who played for Brian Clough, and so I've heard a number of the stories of how he was, and I think so I think we probably are very different in our approach. But what I always loved about Brian Clough was his directness, and also his ability to make things unpredictable. That he would do something that would keep the players on their toes, and, made sure that the players never got too comfortable, that they were always ready for the unexpected. And I think little things like that, can be so valuable in the game, because look, if you live your entire life in a bubble and you only get the same thing every day, yeah, you'll do fine as long as those conditions are met. But if all of a sudden something changes and you can't have everything the way you want it, if you've got no experience of that, you're going to struggle. And so I think, what Brian Clough was fantastic at was making sure that players really were ready for anything that was thrown at them. And, he got huge success at it's unparalleled, really. Like, I know people talk about, obviously, Sir Alex Ferguson won 2 European Cups as well. But by that stage, Manchester United, he built them into a huge entity. And historically, Manchester United were a huge entity, but Nottingham Forest, and then even, he almost did it with Derby County, prior to that. And so, when you look at taking these teams who before that really hadn't done anything, and since that have really not done anything. So, I think that deserves huge respect.
Yeah, truly indeed. I did saw a little bit of Arsene Wenger in yourself, especially on how you coach and help players. Is it fair to say that way?
Yeah, I think so. I think probably I've never met Arsene, but from the outside looking in, I think he is probably more tied to a singular vision of the game than I am in terms of a footballing philosophy. I think for me, I'm a bit more pragmatic. I have a way I want to play the game, but I also appreciate that, I have to take the environmental factors into account, quite significantly. Otherwise, you might always be playing a losing game. Whereas I think in the case of Arsenal, and, I went and watched, when I was living in London, I went and watched a number of Arsenal games under Wenger, and, really, adhered to that playing philosophy, no questions asked. And so I don't think I'm as tied to a singular playing philosophy. I have my idea of the game, but I also know, I can move 15 or 20% from it in order to get the success that we need to get.
Okay. And of course, talking about the current situation of COVID-19 pandemic, how has that affected your job at the moment right now?
Yeah, I think it's obviously going on a while now. We're a few months into all of this, and in the initial phase, being an international coach, you get into a rhythm of managing your own time because you're not always on the field with the players. So you sort of know how to manage your time off the field, maybe a bit more effectively than a club coach would be used to. And so in that sense, the adjustment to being in the office more was a little bit smoother, I think. In the first couple of months, it's funny because we had a lot of objectives for sort of the next 12 to 18 months in terms of putting a lot of things in place in the background, in terms of, you know, presentations, in terms of video slides, in terms of moving graphics, you know, all the way from our game model to even position specific, so that we can say, you know, if a new player comes into our team, we can say, okay, what position is he? Right, give him those slides, give him those videos, so that he's really understanding what's expected of him in terms of our playing model. And so we expected that might take a while because you're doing a lot of other things at the same time. But because of, you know, us being in the office more now, we've got that all complete. You know, that took about, you know, 5 weeks, you know, solid work without disruptions, and we got it all completed. And we then moved on again, like I've already touched on, to set up our online platform, which was something we felt was important long term anyway, because, you know, the players are with their clubs a lot of the year. So how do we maybe do some tactical work from a theoretical point of view? And we've managed to launch that online platform, so that's been really good. And we've also set up some deals. You know, I've been in discussions with, you know, analytics companies who were very close to, you know, signing off a big deal for Ugandan football on. We've been talking to kit manufacturers, and so we've actually got a lot done. We've got a huge amount done that actually, I think, for the long-term health and progress of Ugandan football is going to be really beneficial. So, you know, it's not the way we wanted it to be done. There's no doubt about that. You know, we were supposed to be playing in the African Championship tournament in April, which is like the B-level tournament in Africa. We were getting ready for it, and it was postponed. So there's a lot of frustration with that. But no, we've used the time wisely. And so I think going forward, we're going to be more prepared with all the off-field stuff than we could ever have hoped to have been without this time to focus on it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, guys, any other questions?
Basically, I was thank you for being part of the show, Mr. Johnathan, and I hope we have a successful journey with Uganda, and hopefully see you in the World Cup in Qatar in 2022. Good luck in your journey.
Yeah, thank you, Johnathan, for joining our podcast today.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much, guys. And yeah, it's a joy sort of to have a chat with you guys. You know, I think it's great. Modern technology allows us to, you know, engage in ways like this that maybe 5-10 years ago wouldn't have been possible. But, you know, I think bringing the football world closer together, you know, is only a good thing.
Truly what you said. I mean, if it wasn't for technology, we couldn't even have this podcast. So you're absolutely right about that. And of course, you know, thank you as well for being a part of our podcast. Of course, we wish you all the best in your journey, whether it's Uganda and beyond. Who knows, maybe one day we might hear your name coaching somewhere in Malaysia. You never know.
You never know. I think for me, people always say to me, you know, to be honest, the country, it's always about the opportunity. You know, so when people, I very rarely look at the map anymore. You know, it's like, it doesn't really matter if it's north, south, east, or west. It's about, is it a great opportunity to go and not just be successful, but have an impact? You know, does it line up with my skill set? You know, and if I can have a positive impact, then yeah, you never know where this football life can take you.
True. Okay, so with that said and done, we will end this episode of the podcast. So goodbye for now.